sick grizzly bear was tied with ropes in the forest. What this human baby did put everyone in tears. If you love my content, consider supporting it with a super thanks. Every bit of your support helps us create even more amazing stories for you. The forest grew quiet as the sun began to set. Birds stopped singing, and the wind barely moved through the tall pine trees. In a small wooden cabin at the edge of the forest, little Emma Harper, just 11 months old, played in her crib by the window. Her parents, Sarah and Nathan Harper, had moved to this remote location 3 months ago, seeking peace away from the busy city life. Sarah placed Emma in her crib for a short nap while she prepared dinner. "I'll just be in the kitchen, sweetheart," she whispered, kissing Emma's forehead. The baby giggled and reached for her mother's long brown hair before settling down with her favorite stuffed bear. Deep in the forest, about half a mile from the Harper cabin, something terrible was happening. A magnificent grizzly bear, once the proud guardian of these woods, lay on its side, breathing heavily. Thick, coarse ropes tied its legs together and bound it to a tree. The bear's fur, usually glossy and brown, looked dull and matted with dirt and blood. Its eyes, once fierce and alert, now showed only pain and exhaustion. 3 men had trapped the bear earlier that day. They weren't hunters. They were poachers looking to sell bear parts on the black market. The largest man, with a scar across his cheek, kicked the bear's side. "This one's sick. Probably won't fetch as much," he grumbled, spitting on the ground. "Let's leave it for now and come back tomorrow. If it's still alive, we'll take what we need then." The men laughed cruelly as they walked away, leaving the bear to suffer alone. The great animal tried once more to break free from its bonds, but it was too weak. Its massive body trembled with each painful breath, and a soft, pained growl escaped its throat, not of anger but of suffering and defeat. Back at the cabin, Emma woke from her nap. The house was quiet. She stood up in her crib and looked out the window toward the forest. Something felt different. The baby couldn't understand what it was, but she felt drawn to look outside. A strange sound carried through the air, faint but distinct, a sound of pain. Sarah had stepped outside to hang laundry, believing Emma would sleep longer. The cabin door remained slightly open, allowing a cool breeze to enter the room. Emma, who had recently learned to climb out of her crib, saw her chance. With determination unusual for such a young child, she carefully made her way down and crawled toward the open door. The forest floor felt strange under Emma's hands and knees. Leaves crunched and twigs snapped as she moved forward, following a sound she didn't understand, but somehow knew was important. The baby crawled farther than she had ever gone before, guided by an instinct even she couldn't comprehend. The sick bear lay still now, conserving what little energy it had left. Its ears perked up slightly at the sound of something approaching. Not the heavy footsteps of the poachers, but something smaller, gentler. Through half-closed eyes, the bear watched as a tiny human baby emerged from between the trees. Emma stopped when she saw the bear. Unlike adults who would have run in terror, the baby showed no fear. She only saw a creature in pain, not unlike her stuffed toy, but much larger and clearly hurting. The bear and baby locked eyes, and in that moment something extraordinary passed between them, a connection that transcended species and language. The bear did not growl or show aggression. Perhaps it was too weak, or perhaps it sensed something pure in this small human. Emma continued forward, her innocent eyes fixed on the ropes that held the great animal captive. Sarah suddenly realized Emma was missing from her crib. Panic surged through her body as she ran back into the house. "Emma!" she called out, her voice rising with fear. She noticed the open door and felt her heart sink. "Nathan!" she screamed, calling for her husband who was chopping wood nearby. "Emma's gone into the forest." Nathan dropped his axe and ran to his wife. "Which direction?" he asked, his face pale with worry. "I don't know," Sarah sobbed. "She was sleeping. I only stepped out for a minute." Nathan grabbed a flashlight. "I'll find her," he promised, though his voice trembled with uncertainty. The forest was vast, and darkness was falling quickly. A baby, alone in these woods, faced countless dangers, including the wild animals that roamed freely. Little did they know that Emma had already encountered the most fearsome predator of the forest, and both their lives were about to change forever. Emma crawled closer to the bear, her tiny hands reaching out toward the massive creature. The bear watched her, its eyes revealing a mixture of pain and curiosity. For a moment, it seemed as though the forest itself held its breath. The evening birds fell silent, and even the rustling leaves stilled as this unlikely meeting unfolded. The bear's massive head lay on the forest floor, its breathing labored and irregular. Up close, Emma could see the crusted blood around its mouth and the deep wounds where the ropes cut into its fur. The sight didn't frighten her. Instead, it awakened something profound in her young heart. She made a soft cooing sound, the same one she used when comforting her stuffed animals at home. The bear's eyes widened slightly at the sound. It had never heard such gentleness directed toward it. Throughout its 7 years of life, humans had meant only one thing: danger. Yet here was this tiny human, approaching without fear or malice. Emma reached the first rope, the one binding the bear's front paws. Her small fingers touched the rough material, and she tugged at it as she would with the strings of her toys. The bear watched, too weak to move, but alert enough to study her every action. "What's that, Mr. Bear?" Emma babbled in her baby language, pointing at the rope. "Hurt? Hurt?" The bear let out a soft whimper in response, as if understanding her innocent question. Its massive paw twitched slightly, causing Emma to giggle. The sound of her laughter echoed through the darkening forest, a sound so pure it seemed to infuse the dying bear with a momentary spark of life. Meanwhile, Nathan and Sarah split up to cover more ground. The forest was growing darker by the minute, making their search increasingly desperate. Nathan took the eastern path, his flashlight beam cutting through the shadows as he called out his daughter's name. Sarah headed west, her voice breaking with each call. "Emma! Emma, baby, where are you?" The poachers, who had settled at their camp about a mile away, heard the distant calls. The man with the scarred face, Victor Crane, looked up from the fire. "Sounds like someone's lost in the woods," he remarked, his voice devoid of compassion. His younger brother, Luke, shifted uncomfortably. "Maybe we should help them." "Mind your business," Victor snapped. "We're not here to play rescue. Besides, we need to finish our job with that bear at first light." The third man, Darren, took a swig from his flask. "That bear didn't look good, might not make it through the night." "Then we'll take what we can get," Victor replied coldly. "Those gallbladders fetch a high price regardless." Back in the forest, Emma had discovered something interesting. As she pulled at the rope, she noticed it loosened slightly. The tree to which the bear was tied had begun to rot from the inside, weakening its hold on the bindings. The poachers had chosen it hastily, not noticing the decay. With childish persistence, Emma kept tugging at the rope, treating it like a game. Each pull caused the rope to slip a fraction more through the crumbling bark. The bear noticed this too, and summoned what little strength it had to move its paw slightly, helping the process. As the first rope began to give way, something extraordinary happened. A single tear formed in the bear's eye. a tear that reflected the last rays of the setting sun. This magnificent creature, faced with unexpected kindness from the most unlikely source, experienced an emotion that transcended its animal nature. If bears could feel gratitude, this one surely did in that moment. A short distance away, Sarah stopped suddenly. Mother's intuition, a force as mysterious as it is powerful, pulled her in a new direction. She veered off the path she had been following and began moving north, her heart pounding with both hope and fear. "Please let her be safe," she whispered to whatever forces might be listening. "Please protect my baby." Back at the poacher's camp, Luke couldn't shake his unease. Unlike his brother, he had joined this illegal venture out of financial desperation rather than cruelty. The sounds of someone searching for their lost one stirred something within him. When Victor and Darren stepped away to check their supplies, Luke made a decision. He would check on the bear, and if he heard someone nearby, he would help them. Emma had managed, through sheer persistence and the bear's subtle movements, to loosen the main rope significantly. The great animal felt the pressure on its chest ease slightly, allowing it to take deeper breaths. Its eyes, which had been dulling with approaching death, now held a faint glimmer of hope. The bear had been sick even before the poachers captured it. A severe infection had weakened its once mighty body, making it an easier target. The men had planned to kill it the next day, but nature had a different schedule in mind, one that involved an 11-month-old child with no concept of fear or prejudice. As the main rope slipped further, Emma clapped her hands with delight. The bear, sensing its bonds weakening, gathered its remaining strength and pulled. The rotting tree creaked, bark crumbling as the rope tore through it. With a sudden snap, the main binding broke free. The bear's front paws were partially liberated, though ropes still bound its hind legs. It raised its massive head, looking at Emma with what could only be described as wonder. It made no move to harm her, quite the opposite. With tremendous effort, it inched its freed paw toward her, nudging her gently, as if saying thank you. Emma laughed and placed her tiny hand on the bear's nose, a gesture so trusting it would have stopped any observer's heart. "Good bear," she said in her baby talk, patting the creature's snout. "Good." The tender moment was interrupted by the sound of approaching footsteps, quick and purposeful. Luke, the younger poacher, had made his way back to check on the bear, his flashlight beam dancing through the trees. When the light fell on the scene before him, he froze in utter disbelief. There, in the growing darkness of the forest, sat a baby girl beside the massive grizzly they had captured, a child touching the face of one of nature's most fearsome predators without a trace of fear. Even more astonishing, the bear showed no aggression toward the child. It was a scene that defied everything Luke thought he knew about wild animals. "Oh my God," he whispered, his flashlight beam trembling as his hand shook. The bear's head snapped up at the sound, its eyes instantly locking onto Luke. A low, warning growl rumbled from its throat, not directed at Emma, but at the man it recognized as one of its tormentors. The bear's body tensed, positioning itself between the child and the perceived threat. Luke's mind raced. His brother would be expecting him back soon. If he told Victor about the child, there was no telling what might happen. Victor wasn't known for his compassion, and witnesses of any kind complicated matters. As Luke stood frozen in indecision, another set of footsteps approached from a different direction, running footsteps accompanied by a woman's frantic voice. "Emma! Emma, where are you?" Sarah burst through the trees, her flashlight beam immediately finding her daughter. What she saw made her blood run cold. Her baby, sitting beside an enormous grizzly bear, with a rough-looking man standing nearby. 3 beams of light now illuminated the extraordinary tableau: a mother, a poacher, an infant, and a partially freed bear caught in a moment of impossible tension. "Emma!" Sarah screamed, her voice shattering the silence. Her maternal instinct overtook all rational thought as she lunged forward to rescue her child. The bear's reaction was immediate. It rose slightly, its massive form towering even in its weakened state. But instead of attacking, it gently nudged Emma behind its bulk, positioning itself between the child and the perceived threats. This gesture, so deliberate, so protective, stopped Sarah in her tracks. "Don't move," Luke warned, raising his hands to show he meant no harm. "That bear is protecting your baby." "Protecting?" Sarah's voice trembled with disbelief. "That's a wild animal. It could kill her in seconds." "But it hasn't," Luke pointed out, his voice low and careful. "Look at them. Just look." Sarah forced herself to take a breath and truly observe the scene. Emma wasn't crying or showing any signs of fear. Instead, she was patting the bear's fur and babbling happily, completely at ease. The bear, despite its obvious injuries and the ropes still binding its hind legs, maintained a protective stance around the child. "This isn't possible," Sarah whispered, her mind struggling to process what she was seeing. "I thought the same thing," Luke admitted, "but I'm seeing it with my own eyes." He hesitated, then added, "Your daughter somehow loosened the ropes. She's been helping it." From a distance, Nathan heard Sarah's scream and change direction, running desperately toward the sound. His mind conjured terrible images: his wife and daughter in danger, attacked by a predator or lost in some treacherous part of the forest. He crashed through undergrowth, branches whipping his face as he ran. Back at the poacher's camp, Victor noticed his brother's extended absence. "Where the hell is Luke?" he growled, checking his watch. "He should have been back by now." Darren shrugged. "Maybe he got lost. These woods can be tricky at night." Victor spat into the fire. He never could follow simple orders. "If he's not back in 5 minutes, we're going to find him." His hand moved to the hunting knife at his belt, a gesture that wasn't lost on Darren. In the clearing, a remarkable negotiation was unfolding. Sarah had edged closer, driven by her need to reach Emma, but restrained by the bear's protective posture. "Emma, sweetheart," she called softly. "Come to Mommy." Emma looked at her mother, then back at the bear, seemingly torn between the two. The baby patted the bear's side and pointed at the remaining ropes around its hind legs. "Hurt," she said clearly, one of the few words she knew. Sarah felt tears spring to her eyes as understanding dawned. Her daughter, in her innocent wisdom, saw only a creature in pain, not a dangerous predator. And somehow, impossibly, the bear recognized this pure intention and responded not with aggression, but with protection. "The bear is sick," Luke explained, keeping his distance. "It's been infected with something. That's why my bro—" He caught himself. "That's why they were able to catch it. It's too weak to hunt." Sarah's gaze snapped to him. "They? You're with the people who did this?" Luke looked down, shame evident on his face. "I made a mistake. I needed money, and my brother— Your brother tied up a sick animal and left it to suffer." Sarah's voice rose with anger. Luke had no answer for that. The moral bankruptcy of his actions hung heavy in the night air. The bear's ears suddenly perked up, sensing something the humans couldn't yet hear. It let out a low, rumbling growl, a warning different from the one it had given Luke earlier. This was deeper, more urgent. Luke recognized the change immediately. "Someone's coming," he whispered, "and I think I know who." Sarah's eyes widened with fear. "My husband—" "No," Luke cut her off. "My brother and his friend, and they won't be as understanding about this situation." The bear struggled to stand fully, its determination to protect Emma overriding its physical weakness. With a tremendous effort, it pulled against the remaining ropes, causing the rotted tree to crack further. Luke made a split-second decision. Moving slowly to avoid startling the bear, he approached the tree and examined where the ropes were secured. "What are you doing?" Sarah asked, tensing. "Something I should have done hours ago," he replied, pulling out his pocket knife. With a few quick cuts, he severed the remaining bindings. The bear was free. For a breathless moment, everyone froze. The grizzly rose to its full height, over 7 feet tall on its hind legs, and let out a roar that seemed to shake the forest itself. Sarah's heart nearly stopped as the massive creature turned toward Emma. But instead of aggression, the bear displayed an almost gentle deliberation. It lowered itself and nudged Emma toward her mother with its snout, as if understanding it was time for the child to return to her own kind. Emma giggled and hugged the bear's face before toddling toward Sarah. The mother scooped up her daughter, tears streaming down her face as she clutched her child close. "Thank you," she whispered, though whether to Luke, the bear, or some higher power, even she couldn't say. The moment of relief was short-lived. Harsh voices and the beams of multiple flashlights cut through the darkness as Victor and Darren approached. "Luke, where the hell are you?" Victor's angry call echoed through the trees. The bear's demeanor changed instantly. It turned toward the sound, its body language transforming from protective to aggressive. Despite its illness, the animal was still a formidable predator, especially when threatened. "You need to get out of here," Luke urged Sarah. "Now. Take your daughter and go." Sarah hesitated. "But what about—" "I'll handle my brother," Luke assured her, though uncertainty flashed in his eyes. "Go, follow that path." He pointed. "It should lead you back toward the edge of the forest." Just then, Nathan burst into the clearing from the opposite direction, his expression wild with fear and determination. "Sarah!" he called out, then froze at the sight of the massive bear. "Nathan!" Sarah cried. "Don't move." The bear swung its attention between Nathan and the approaching poachers, seemingly assessing which posed the greater threat. Emma, secure in her mother's arms, reached toward the animal, babbling what sounded almost like a goodbye. Victor and Darren entered the clearing, weapons drawn. Victor's face contorted with rage when he saw the freed bear and his brother standing near it. "What have you done?" he snarled at Luke. The bear roared again, this time moving deliberately toward Victor and Darren. Despite its weakened state, it was still an intimidating sight, 650 pounds of muscle and fur advancing with clear intent. "Run!" Luke shouted to Sarah and Nathan. "Go now!" Nathan didn't need to be told twice. He rushed to his wife and child, placing himself between them and the unfolding chaos. Together, they retreated into the trees, the sounds of shouting and the bear's growls following them into the darkness. As they ran, Sarah looked back one last time. In the fading light of the abandoned flashlights, she saw the bear confronting the poachers, with Luke attempting to intervene between his brother and the enraged animal. Then the forest closed around them, and the scene was lost to view. The Harper family stumbled through the dark forest, Nathan leading the way with his flashlight while Sarah clutched Emma tightly. The baby was surprisingly calm, occasionally looking back over her mother's shoulder as if expecting to see her unlikely protector following them. "What happened back there?" Nathan gasped as they hurried along. "Was that bear actually protecting our daughter?" Sarah finished his question. Yes, I know it sounds impossible, but Emma somehow connected with it. She was trying to free it from ropes those poachers had used to tie it up. Nathan shook his head in disbelief. But bears are predators. They don't— I know what I saw, Sarah insisted. That bear could have killed Emma at any moment, but instead, it positioned itself between her and danger. It even nudged her toward me when it knew more threats were coming. They reached the edge of the forest, their cabin visible in the distance. Only when they were safely inside, doors locked behind them, did the full weight of what had happened begin to sink in. Emma, seemingly unaffected by the ordeal, reached for her stuffed bear and hugged it close, babbling happily. Sarah watched her daughter with new eyes, wondering at the pure innocence that had allowed her to see past species and fear, to recognize suffering and respond with compassion. "Should we call the police?" Nathan asked, reaching for the phone. Those men were poachers. They were planning to kill that bear. Sarah nodded, but her thoughts were elsewhere. "Do you think it will survive?" It looked so sick. As Nathan made the call, reporting the poachers and their location without mentioning Emma's extraordinary encounter, Sarah sat by the window looking out at the darkened forest. Somewhere out there, a battle for survival was playing out, not just for the bear, but for the young man who had made a last-minute choice for compassion over cruelty. The local sheriff promised to send deputies to investigate the poaching report, though he sounded skeptical about finding anyone this late at night. Nathan didn't push the issue, aware of how incredible the full story would sound. Sleep came fitfully for Sarah and Nathan that night. Every sound from the forest made them start. A branch breaking, an animal calling, the wind through the trees. Emma, however, slept peacefully, clutching her stuffed bear and occasionally smiling in her dreams. In the pre-dawn hours, Sarah was awakened by a strange feeling. She stood and went to the window, drawn by an instinct she couldn't name. The forest was shrouded in mist, the trees mere shadows in the gray light. But something moved at the edge of the clearing, something large. She squinted, her heart racing. There, barely visible through the morning fog, stood the grizzly bear. It was upright, swaying slightly, its massive form unmistakable even at a distance. Sarah held her breath, frozen between fear and wonder. The bear remained motionless, as if standing guard or perhaps saying farewell. Then, as silently as it had appeared, the bear turned and vanished into the mist-covered forest. Sarah stayed at the window long after it had gone, contemplating the extraordinary events of the previous day. A wild predator had chosen to protect her child rather than harm her. It defied everything she thought she knew about nature, yet she had witnessed it with her own eyes. When morning finally came, Nathan made coffee while Sarah fed Emma breakfast. They spoke in hushed tones about what they should tell the authorities. The full truth seemed too incredible to share, yet keeping it secret felt somehow wrong. Their quiet discussion was interrupted by the sound of vehicles approaching. Looking out, they saw 2 police cruisers and a truck from the State Wildlife Agency pulling up to their cabin. Sheriff Donovan, a gruff man in his 50s with a weathered face that spoke of decades in the wilderness, knocked firmly on their door. With him was a younger deputy and a woman in the uniform of the Wildlife Service. "Mr. and Mrs. Harper?" the sheriff inquired as Nathan opened the door. "We're following up on your report from last night. Found something you might want to know about." Sarah joined them, holding Emma in her arms. "Did you find the poachers?" she asked. The sheriff exchanged glances with the wildlife officer. "Ma'am, I'm Doctor Abigail Winters from State Wildlife," the woman introduced herself. And yes, we found evidence of poaching activity, including cut ropes and signs of a camp about a mile north. We also found 2 men. 2? Sarah's voice caught. Not 3. The sheriff's eyebrows rose slightly. You mentioned 3 in your report. Nathan nodded. There were 3 men involved. One of them... He hesitated, looking at Sarah. One of them helped us, Sarah finished. He cut the bear free when he saw that our daughter had somehow formed a connection with it. Dr. Winter's scientific skepticism was evident in her expression. A connection? With a grizzly? I know how it sounds, Sarah acknowledged. But that bear was protecting our daughter. If you'd seen it. The sheriff cleared his throat. Well, that might explain some things. We found 2 men, brothers according to their ID, Victor and Luke Crane. Victor was dead, massive trauma consistent with a bear attack. Luke was badly injured, but alive. He's being airlifted to County Memorial as we speak. Sarah gasped, her hand going to her mouth. Nathan put a steadying arm around her shoulders. Before they took him away, Luke kept saying something about a miracle and a baby, the sheriff continued. His eyes now resting on Emma. Didn't make much sense at the time. Dr. Winters stepped forward, her scientific curiosity evident. Mrs. Harper, could you tell me exactly what happened with this bear? It's very unusual behavior for a grizzly, especially one under stress. Sarah hesitated, then decided that the truth, however unbelievable, needed to be told. She recounted the events of the previous evening. Emma's wandering into the forest, her efforts to free the sick bear, and the animal's subsequent protection of her child. Nathan added details about the confrontation with the poachers and their escape. As they spoke, Emma babbled happily, occasionally pointing to her stuffed bear, and then to the forest, as if trying to participate in the conversation. Dr. Winters listened with increasing fascination. There have been rare documented cases of wild predators showing unusual behavior toward human children, she admitted, but nothing quite like this. I'd like to look for this bear, not to capture it, she added quickly, seeing Sarah's expression, but to observe and perhaps treat its illness if possible. The 3rd man, Nathan remembered suddenly. Darren, I think Luke called him. What happened to him? No sign of him, the sheriff replied. Probably ran off when things went south. We'll find him eventually. Poachers like that always slip up sooner or later. After taking detailed statements and promising to return with updates, the officials left. Nathan and Sarah stood in their doorway, watching the vehicles disappear down the dirt road. Do you think they believed us? Sarah wondered. Nathan shrugged. About some of it, maybe, the rest. He looked down at Emma, who was playing contentedly at their feet. Some things you have to see to believe. Throughout the day, Sarah found herself returning to the window, scanning the forest edge. Evening came with no further sign of the bear. Dr. Winters had organized a small team to search for the injured animal, hoping to provide medical treatment, but so far they had found nothing. As Sarah put Emma to bed that night, the baby seemed unusually insistent on having her window slightly open, fussing whenever Sarah tried to close it. Finally, Sarah relented, leaving it open a crack to let in the cool night air and the sounds of the forest. You miss your big friend, don't you? Sarah whispered, stroking Emma's hair as she drifted off to sleep. In the middle of the night, Sarah was awakened by a strange sound. Not threatening, but unusual enough to pull her from sleep. She slipped out of bed, careful not to wake Nathan, and went to check on Emma. The baby's room was bathed in moonlight. Emma was standing in her crib, wide awake, looking toward the partially open window with delight. Sarah followed her daughter's gaze. There, just outside, The massive head of the grizzly bear was visible. It had risen on its hind legs to reach the window, its breath fogging the glass. Its eyes, clearer now, more alert than they had been the day before, fixed on Emma with what could only be described as affection. Sarah's first instinct was to snatch her daughter away, to scream for Nathan, to slam the window shut. But something stopped her. The bear made no move to break the glass or force its way in. It simply watched Emma, who laughed and reached toward it, separated by mere inches of glass and wood. After a long moment, the bear lowered itself from the window and moved away. Sarah hurried to look out, expecting to see it retreat into the forest. Instead, she watched as the massive animal circled the cabin once, then settled itself at the edge of the clearing, facing the house like a sentinel. Understanding dawned on Sarah with startling clarity. The bear wasn't just checking on Emma, it was guarding her. When morning came, the bear was gone, but Sarah found large paw prints circling their cabin. She said nothing to Nathan, unsure how to explain what she had witnessed. But that night, and for several nights after, she would wake to find the grizzly at Emma's window, keeping its silent vigil before taking up its post outside. A week later, Dr. Winters returned to their cabin with surprising news. "We found traces of your bear," she explained, sitting at their kitchen table while Emma played nearby. "Blood samples from the poaching site show it was suffering from a bacterial infection, serious, but treatable with antibiotics. We've been leaving medicated food at strategic locations, and it appears the bear has been taking it. So it might recover?" Sarah asked hopefully. "It's looking that way, Doctor," Winters confirmed. "We've also had reports from other cabins in the area about a bear passing through, but oddly, it hasn't approached any of them or shown any aggression. It only seems interested in this particular location." Her gaze moved meaningfully around their home. "Has Luke Crane said anything more?" Nathan asked, changing the subject. Dr. Winters nodded. "He's recovering well and has provided detailed testimony against his brother and the missing accomplice. He's also been talking about what he saw that night. A baby who wasn't afraid of a bear, and a bear that protected her instead of attacking." She smiled slightly. "His statement has caused quite a stir in the wildlife community." After Dr. Winters left, promising to keep them updated on the bear's condition, Sarah and Nathan sat on their porch watching Emma play in the yard. The boundary of the forest loomed beyond, mysterious and somehow less threatening than it had once seemed. "Do you think we'll ever understand what happened?" Nathan asked quietly. "Why that bear chose to protect her instead of—" He couldn't finish the sentence, the alternative too terrible to voice. Sarah watched Emma toddling about, stopping occasionally to look toward the trees as if expecting her large friend to appear. "I think," she said slowly, "that sometimes the purest hearts can see what the rest of us miss. Emma didn't see a predator or a wild animal. She just saw a creature in pain, and somehow that bear recognized her innocence and responded to it." Nathan squeezed her hand. "Our daughter's going to be quite something when she grows up, isn't she?" Sarah smiled, tears welling in her eyes. "She already is." As the weeks passed, the visits from the bear became less frequent but didn't stop entirely. It would appear every few nights, checking on Emma before disappearing back into the forest. Dr. Winters' team continued to monitor it from a distance, reporting that its health was improving steadily. One evening, as summer turned to fall, Sarah found something unusual on their porch. A freshly killed rabbit, laid out carefully by the door. There were no signs of human hunters, but the large paw prints in the soft earth told their own story. "I think it's bringing us gifts," she told Nathan, both touched and amused by the gesture. The story of Emma and the bear remained largely private, though rumors spread through the small community. Most dismissed it as an exaggeration or a misunderstanding of animal behavior. But Luke Crane, who eventually received a reduced sentence for his cooperation with authorities, never wavered in his account of what he had witnessed that night. "I saw something in that forest that changed me," he told investigators. "A baby who showed kindness to a suffering creature, and a wild animal that chose protection over instinct. It made me question everything I thought I knew about the natural world, and about myself." The third poacher, Darren, was eventually caught trying to sell illegal animal parts in a neighboring state. His version of events painted a picture of mass hysteria and exaggeration, but the physical evidence and the testimony of multiple witnesses told a different story. As for Emma, she grew from a toddler to a young child with an uncanny affinity for animals. Her parents noticed that injured creatures would often appear near their home. Birds with broken wings, fox kits separated from their mothers, even a young deer with an injured leg. Emma would find them, and somehow they would allow her to help. On her 5th birthday, Sarah took Emma for a walk along the forest edge, holding her daughter's small hand in her own. They stopped at a familiar clearing, now overgrown with wildflowers and new saplings. "This is where you met your friend," Sarah told her. "Do you remember?" Emma looked thoughtful, her young face serious. "The big bear who was hurt," she said. "I remember he was sad, and then he wasn't anymore." Sarah knelt beside her daughter. "That's right, you helped him when he needed it most." Emma smiled, pointing deeper into the forest. "He's still out there, Mommy. Sometimes I hear him at night." Sarah followed her daughter's gesture, wondering if the great grizzly still roamed these woods or if it had moved on to more remote territories. The rangers hadn't reported sightings in nearly a year, though occasionally hikers would describe an unusually gentle bear that watched them from a distance without approaching. As they turned to head back to the cabin, a rustling in the underbrush caught their attention. Sarah tensed, automatically pulling Emma closer. But Emma showed no fear, her eyes bright with anticipation. From between the trees, a massive grizzly emerged, its coat now glossy and thick, its movements strong and deliberate. It stopped at the edge of the clearing, simply watching them. Around its neck was a wildlife tracking collar, indicating that Dr. Winter's team was still monitoring its movements. "It's him," Emma whispered, her voice filled with wonder. "He came to say hello?" The bear made no move to approach them, maintaining a respectful distance. Its eyes, however, remained fixed on Emma, recognition evident in its gaze. There was intelligence there, and something else, something that transcended the usual boundaries between humans and wild creatures. Mother and daughter stood motionless, sharing this extraordinary moment of connection. After what seemed like an eternity, the bear huffed softly, as if in greeting, then turned and disappeared back into the forest depths. Emma waved after it. "Goodbye, friend," she called. "Thank you for visiting." Sarah wiped away tears as they walked home hand in hand. She knew that most people would never believe what had happened between her daughter and the grizzly bear. They would cite scientific explanations or dismiss it as a child's fantasy embellished by worried parents. But Sarah had witnessed something miraculous. A moment when the barriers between species fell away, revealing a deeper truth about compassion and connection. Her daughter had seen a suffering creature and responded with pure, unconditional kindness. And somehow, against all odds, that kindness had awakened something profound in one of nature's most fearsome predators. The bear continued to visit occasionally over the years, always keeping its distance but making its presence known. As Emma grew older, she developed a reputation in their community as something of an animal whisperer, eventually going on to study wildlife biology at university. but the story of her first encounter, of a sick grizzly bear tied with ropes in the forest, and the human baby whose compassion touched hearts far beyond her own species, remained a sacred tale passed down through their family, a testament to the extraordinary power of innocence and empathy in a world too often defined by fear. And somewhere in the vast wilderness, a grizzly bear carried the memory of a tiny human who saw past its fearsome appearance to recognize its suffering, and in doing so changed both their lives forever. 20 years later, Dr. Emma Harper stood at the edge of the national forest, breathing in the familiar scent of pine and earth that had defined her childhood. At 25, she had fulfilled her early promise, becoming one of the youngest wildlife biologists ever hired by the State Conservation Department. Today marked her return to the forests where her remarkable journey began. Not as a child with an inexplicable connection to wild animals, but as the head of a groundbreaking research project on bear behavior and cognition. "Everything's been set up at the research station, Doctor." Harper, her assistant, Marcus Chen, informed her as he approached with a tablet displaying their field equipment inventory. "The tracking systems are online, and the observation blinds are positioned according to your specifications." Emma smiled, adjusting her department-issued cap. "Thanks, Marcus. And please, just call me Emma. Dr. Harper still makes me look around for my father." Her parents, Sarah and Nathan, had moved to a quieter retirement community in a neighboring state 5 years ago, though they visited often. The cabin of her childhood had been converted into her home base, both for sentimental reasons and practical ones. This region had one of the highest concentrations of grizzly bears in the state, making it ideal for her research. "Sorry, force of habit," Marcus replied with a grin. "I still can't believe I'm working with the Emma Harper. Your paper on interspecies empathy was what made me want to specialize in wildlife psychology." Emma felt a flush of embarrassment. Her academic reputation had grown rapidly after she published her controversial thesis on emotional intelligence in large predators. While many of her colleagues attributed her insights to rigorous observation and innovative methodology, Emma knew the truth was more personal and far more extraordinary. "Just wait until you see these bears up close," she said, deflecting the praise. "They're going to challenge everything you think you know about predator behavior." As they walked toward the research station, Emma's phone buzzed with a notification. It was from the tracking system they'd established throughout the forest. One of the bear monitoring collars had just entered the outer perimeter of their research zone. "Looks like we have our first visitor," she noted, checking the identification code. Her heart skipped when she recognized the number. UB7734. The Old Guardian, as her team had nicknamed him. No one knew exactly how old this particular grizzly was, but Wildlife Services had been tracking him for nearly 2 decades. The data suggested he was well into his senior years. Most wild grizzlies rarely lived past 25, and this one had to be approaching that milestone. What made him remarkable wasn't just his age, but his behavior. Unlike typical male grizzlies, he exhibited unusually low aggression toward humans, often appearing to deliberately avoid confrontation rather than engage in it. Emma had never told anyone on her team why she had requested this specific bear be included in her study. Some secrets were still too precious and too unbelievable to share. "I'll head out to observation point 3, Emma decided, grabbing her field pack. "It's closest to his current location." "Want company?" Marcus offered, already reaching for his own gear. Emma hesitated. "Not this time. First observations are better with minimal human presence." She smiled to soften the rejection. "Review the overnight camera footage from the feeding stations instead. I want to know if we've had any other visitors." As Marcus nodded and headed back to the research station, Emma set off alone through the familiar forest trails. The path to observation, point 3, took her near the clearing where, 20 years earlier, a baby girl and a suffering bear had formed an impossible bond. The observation blind was a marvel of modern wildlife research technology, camouflaged to blend perfectly with the surrounding forest, scent sealed to prevent detection, and equipped with thermal imaging and high-resolution cameras. Emma settled inside, preparing for what might be hours of waiting. Wildlife research required patience above all else, but UB7734 seemed to have other ideas. Within 30 minutes, the massive grizzly appeared at the edge of the clearing, his movements deliberate and surprisingly agile for his age. His coat, once rich brown, now carried significant silver graying around his face and shoulders. The tracking collar around his neck was barely visible beneath his thick fur. Emma held her breath, watching through the one-way viewing panel. The bear paused, lifting his nose to test the air currents. Then, to Emma's astonishment, he turned directly toward the observation blind, a structure designed to be imperceptible to wildlife, and stared with unmistakable intent. "Impossible," Emma whispered to herself. There was no way the bear could know she was there. The blind eliminated visual, olfactory, and auditory cues. Yet the great animal continued to gaze at her hiding spot, his head tilted slightly as if in curiosity. Then, in a gesture that sent chills down Emma's spine, he sat back on his haunches, almost like a trained dog awaiting acknowledgement. Emma's scientific mind raced through possible explanations. A coincidence, perhaps, or some environmental factor she hadn't accounted for. But in her heart, a different understanding bloomed. He remembers me. The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying in its implications. No scientific literature supported the idea that bears could recognize specific humans after 2 decades, let alone form emotional attachments to them. Publishing such a claim would be professional suicide. Yet there he sat, this aged grizzly, watching her hiding place with what could only be described as expectation. Emma's hand moved to the blind's doorway. Every protocol she'd established, every safety measure she'd implemented for her team, dictated that she remain inside. But something stronger than protocol pulled at her. A memory of tiny hands fearlessly touching coarse fur, of a connection that transcended the natural order. Before she could reconsider, Emma opened the door and stepped into the clearing. The bear rose to all fours immediately, his massive head tracking her movement. At his full height, he stood nearly 8 feet tall, weighing close to 800 pounds, a creature capable of killing her with a single blow. "Hello, old friend," Emma said softly, her voice steady despite the hammering of her heart. The grizzly made a low sound in his throat, not a growl, but something softer, almost like a rumble of recognition. He took 1 step toward her, then stopped, as if respecting an invisible boundary. Emma remained still, fighting every instinct that screamed at her to retreat. This moment defied scientific explanation, yet it felt like the culmination of a path she'd been walking her entire life. "Do you remember?" she asked, knowing how foolish the question would sound to her colleagues. It was a long time ago. The bear lowered his massive head, then raised it again, his movements deliberate. With careful steps, he approached until he was just 15 feet away, close enough for Emma to see the scars that marked his neck where ropes had once cut into his flesh. At that moment, Emma's radio crackled to life. "Emma! Are you there?" Marcus's voice broke the spell. "We've got movement near your position. UB7734 is—" "I know," Emma replied calmly, keeping her eyes on the bear. "He's here with me." Silence followed. Then Marcus's voice returned, high with alarm. "Inside the blind, right? Tell me you're inside the blind. I'm in the clearing, Emma admitted. And I'm fine. Don't send anyone. I repeat, do not approach. This is... She searched for words that wouldn't sound completely irrational. This is part of the research. She turned off the radio before Marcus could protest further, knowing she would have significant explaining to do later. But this moment belonged to her and the bear alone. The grizzly huffed softly, then did something extraordinary. He lowered himself to the ground, resting his great head on his paws, his eyes never leaving Emma's face. The posture was one of complete non-aggression, almost submission. Tears welled in Emma's eyes. "You do remember," she whispered. For nearly an hour, human and bear remained in the clearing together, separated by a mere dozen feet, but connected by something far more profound than physical proximity. Emma spoke softly, telling the bear about her life since their first encounter, about her studies and her return to these woods. Whether he understood her words didn't matter. The gentle attention in his eyes was enough. Eventually, the bear rose and ambled toward the forest edge. Before disappearing among the trees, he turned back once more, as if memorizing her presence. Then he was gone, leaving Emma with a scientific miracle she could never fully document. When she returned to the research station, Emma faced the expected barrage of concern and reprimands from her team. Marcus, in particular, was beside himself. "You broke every safety protocol we have," he exclaimed, pacing the main cabin's floor. "That bear could have killed you in seconds." "But he didn't," Emma pointed out calmly, making notes in her research journal. "And that's exactly what makes him so special." "Special doesn't mean safe," Marcus countered. "Promise me you won't do that again, at least not without backup." Emma gave him a non-committal smile, already knowing she would seek out the bear again. But her plans were interrupted the next morning when an urgent call came in from State Wildlife Services. "Dr. Harper, we have a situation that requires your expertise," the department director informed her. "There's been a bear attack at a new development about 12 miles from your location." Emma's stomach tightened. "Casualties?" "One injury, not life-threatening, but this is sensitive. The development is the new Mountain Vista Estates, Senator Crane's project." The name hit Emma like a physical blow. Crane? As in Luke Crane. His son, actually. Luke Crane passed away last year, but his son Richard inherited his interests, including this development. Richard's making a lot of noise about the bear population being a public safety threat. He's demanding emergency measures. Emma knew what emergency measures meant: culling the bear population, perhaps even issuing hunting permits for a species that had only recently been removed from the endangered list. "I'll be there in 30 minutes, she promised, already reaching for her field kit. The Mountain Vista Estates was everything Emma despised about modern encroachment on wildlife habitats. Luxury homes built directly at the forest edge, with artificial landscaping and no consideration for the animals displaced by the construction. As her department vehicle pulled up to the gatehouse, she could see news vans already assembled, their satellite dishes reaching skyward. Richard Crane stood at the center of a small crowd, his expensive suit and perfectly coiffed hair marking him as the development's owner. At 40, he had made a name for himself as an ambitious businessman and aspiring politician, riding on both his father's redemption story and his uncle's notorious end to craft a public persona of environmental awareness masking ruthless development practices. "Dr. Harper," he greeted her with practiced charm as she approached. "Thank you for coming so quickly. As you can see, we have a serious predator problem." Emma maintained her professional composure. "I understand there was an incident, Senator. I'd like to examine the site before drawing any conclusions." Richard gestured toward a half-built structure where police and wildlife officers were gathered. One of our construction workers was attacked this morning. If he hadn't had the presence of mind to take shelter in that equipment shed, we'd be dealing with a fatality. The injured worker, a man in his 30s with a bandaged arm, was giving his statement to a police officer. Emma approached and introduced herself. "Can you describe the bear that attacked you?" she asked after expressing concern for his injury. The man frowned. "That's just it. I'm not entirely sure it was trying to attack me. I was carrying supplies when I came around the corner and startled it. It reared up and swiped at me, but then it just backed off, almost like it was warning me rather than pursuing me." Emma felt a flicker of relief. "Did you notice if it was wearing a tracking collar?" "I wasn't exactly looking for accessories," the man replied with a nervous laugh. "But yeah, come to think of it, I think it had something around its neck." Richard Crane had approached during their conversation. "The collar is irrelevant, Doctor." "Harper, the fact remains that a dangerous predator is threatening human lives on private property. My father may have had his eccentricities about wildlife conservation, but I have a responsibility to my investors and residents." There was something in his tone that set Emma on edge, a dismissiveness that suggested the conclusion had already been reached before she'd even arrived. "Senator Crane, bears don't typically approach construction sites without reason," she explained. "Was there food waste left out? Any attractants that might have drawn it in?" Richard's expression hardened slightly. "Are you suggesting we're responsible for this attack?" "I'm suggesting that understanding why the bear was here is crucial to preventing future incidents," Emma clarified. "And to be clear, based on the worker's account, this sounds like a defensive reaction, not a predatory attack." While they spoke, Emma scanned the construction site. Something about the layout nagged at her memory. The development was being built near a natural spring that fed into a creek system, a water source that would be vital to local wildlife, especially during the dry summer months. "How long has construction been underway here?" she asked, walking toward the spring. Richard followed, his irritation barely concealed. "Just over 3 months. We have all the necessary permits, if that's what you're implying." Emma stopped at the edge of the spring, noting the construction debris that partially blocked its flow. "This water source is marked in our wildlife maps as a critical resource for multiple species, including bears. Was the environmental impact study updated to account for this construction?" Richard's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Dr. Harper, I appreciate your concern, but the paperwork is all in order. What I need from your department is a solution to our bear problem, preferably one that ensures the safety of the humans living and working here." As they spoke, Emma's radio crackled. It was Marcus. "Emma, we've got a location on UB 7734, he reported. "He's leaving his usual territory and moving toward the development site. ETA about 20 minutes at his current pace." Emma felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. The old guardian was heading directly toward them, toward a site where armed wildlife officers waited with tranquilizer guns that could easily be exchanged for more lethal options if the situation escalated. "I need to set up a temporary observation post," she told Richard firmly. "There's a specific bear approaching that's part of our research study. I want to intercept and redirect him before he enters your property." Richard looked skeptical, but nodded. "Do what you need to do, but I'm putting you on notice, Doctor." "Harper, if there's another incident, I'll be taking this to the state level. My development has created 300 local jobs and will bring millions in tax revenue to this county." Emma didn't bother responding to the thinly veiled threat. She radioed Marcus for backup and began setting up a small observation post at the forest edge, strategically placing attractants that would hopefully draw the old guardian away from the construction site. As she worked, a wildlife officer approached, an older man with a weathered face and kind eyes. "Dr. Harper? I'm Officer Reynolds. Been with the department 30 years now." He gestured toward her preparations. "You're going to a lot of trouble for one bear." Emma secured the last of the scent markers before responding. "This particular bear is special. He's been monitored for decades and has never shown aggression toward humans." Officer Reynolds studied her face. "You know, I've been around these parts a long time. About 20 years ago, I was a deputy sheriff when we got a strange call about poachers and a bear incident." He paused meaningfully. "Involved a family named Harper and their baby daughter." Emma froze, her hand halfway to her gear bag. "You were there?" He nodded. "Helped investigate the scene. Found 2 brothers, one dead, one injured, and a lot of evidence that didn't make conventional sense. The surviving brother, Luke Crane, told quite a story about a baby and a bear." His eyes crinkled with the memory. "Most wrote it off as trauma or guilt, but I always wondered." Before Emma could respond, movement at the forest edge caught their attention. The massive form of UB-7734 emerged from the trees, his silver-flecked coat gleaming in the sunlight. He paused, testing the air, then began moving purposefully, not toward Emma's attractants, but directly toward the construction site. "That's him," Emma said urgently. "I need to intercept him before someone panics." Officer Reynolds put a restraining hand on her arm. "Dr. Harper, that's a wild predator heading toward a site full of people. Protocol is clear." "Please," Emma implored. "Give me 5 minutes. This bear isn't a threat. He's protecting something." The old officer hesitated, then nodded. 5 minutes, but I'll have to alert the others he's approaching." Emma moved quickly through the underbrush, positioning herself between the bear and the construction site. When the great grizzly spotted her, he slowed his pace but didn't stop. His attention seemed focused on something beyond her, something at the development. "What is it?" Emma asked softly, standing her ground as the massive animal approached. "What are you trying to tell me?" The bear huffed, circling around her with clear intent to continue toward the construction. His behavior wasn't aggressive, but it was unusually determined. In a flash of insight, Emma realized what was happening. The development wasn't just blocking a water source, it was being built directly on top of a traditional denning area. Bears often return to the same general locations year after year for their winter hibernation. With fall approaching, the old guardian was following ancient instincts to a place that no longer existed as he remembered it. "The den sites," she murmured. "They're building over the den sites." She turned to follow the bear, who had now bypassed her and was moving with increasing speed toward a partially excavated area. Construction workers spotted him and began shouting in alarm. In the distance, Emma could see Richard Crane, pointing and giving orders to the wildlife officers who were raising their rifles. "Stop!" Emma shouted, running toward them. "Don't shoot, he's not attacking." The bear reached the excavation site and began pawing urgently at a mound of earth, ignoring the humans scrambling away from him. Emma pushed past the line of officers, placing herself between their weapons and the bear. "Dr. Harper, move away from the animal immediately," one of the officers ordered. "He's trying to dig something out," Emma insisted, turning to watch the bear's frantic efforts. "There's something under there." Richard Crane approached, his face flushed with anger. "That animal is destroying private property. I insist you remove it, or I will have my security team do so." At that moment, the bear's digging revealed something that caused Emma's heart to stop. a small dark opening in the earth, a den entrance, and from within, barely audible over the human commotion, came the high-pitched whine of bear cubs. "There are cubs down there," Emma announced, loud enough for everyone to hear. "This isn't aggression, it's rescue. Your construction buried a denned mother with her cubs." The revelation caused immediate confusion among the officers and workers. Richard Crane's expression shifted from anger to calculation as he assessed the public relations implications of the situation. "We had no way of knowing," he began, already crafting his defensive narrative. "The environmental survey should have identified all den sites," Emma countered, kneeling to examine the opening. "This is exactly why proper wildlife assessments are mandatory before breaking ground." The old guardian continued to dig, widening the opening with powerful sweeps of his paws. His behavior defied conventional understanding of bear social structures. Male bears typically showed little interest in cubs, sometimes even preying on them. Yet here was this aged grizzly, working desperately to free trapped youngsters that couldn't possibly be his own. Officer Reynolds approached cautiously. "What's the plan here, Dr. Harper? Those cubs won't survive without their mother." Emma made a quick decision. "We need to help him excavate, then assess the mother bear's condition. If she's alive, we can relocate the family unit. If not—" She didn't finish the sentence, the implications clear. The next 2 hours unfolded in a surreal collaboration between humans and a wild predator. While most of the construction workers and wildlife officers maintained a safe distance, Emma, Officer Reynolds, and 2 brave wildlife technicians worked alongside the old guardian to widen the collapsed den entrance. Richard Crane, sensing a potential public relations disaster, had retreated to make calls to his legal team. The bear showed no aggression toward the humans helping him, sometimes pausing to watch their efforts before resuming his own digging. When the opening was finally large enough, he backed away, as if inviting Emma to proceed. "I'll go in," she volunteered, securing a headlamp. "The cubs are more likely to respond to a human than to flashlights and noises." The den was cramped and oxygen poor, forcing Emma to crawl on her belly through the narrow passage. The beam of her headlamp revealed what she had feared. The mother bear lay unmoving, partially crushed by a fallen support beam from the construction above. Pressed against her were 3 tiny cubs, no more than a few months old, whimpering weakly. "The mother's dead," Emma reported through her radio. "3 cubs alive but in distress. I'm bringing them out one by one." Carefully gathering the first cub, Emma backed out of the den. As she emerged with the tiny creature, the gathered crowd fell silent. The old guardian approached, sniffing the cub gently before backing away to let Emma hand it to the wildlife technicians. One by one, Emma rescued the 3 cubs from their collapsed den. Each time, the old guardian inspected the cub before allowing it to be taken to the emergency wildlife transport that had arrived on site. When the last cub was safely retrieved, Emma turned to face the assembled workers, officers, and now, news cameras that had gathered to document the extraordinary rescue. "These cubs have lost their mother due to construction that ignored or overlooked critical wildlife habitats," she stated clearly, aware that her words were being recorded. "They will require specialized care at our rehabilitation facility before any attempt can be made to return them to the wild." As the cubs were prepared for transport, the old guardian remained at the site, watching the proceedings with what could only be described as vigilant attention. When the vehicle finally departed with its precious cargo, he turned as if to follow it. "Let him go," Emma instructed the officers who raised their tranquilizer guns in response to his movement. "He's not a threat." To everyone's amazement, the massive grizzly followed the transport vehicle to the access road before stopping at the forest boundary. There he stood, a sentinel figure watching until the vehicle disappeared from view. In the aftermath, Emma found herself at the center of a media storm. The image of a wildlife biologist working alongside a massive grizzly to rescue orphaned cubs made headlines across the country. Environmental groups seized on the story as evidence of the dangers of unchecked development, while Richard Crane's public relations team worked overtime to reframe the incident as an opportunity for corporate environmental responsibility. 2 days later, as Emma checked on the rescued cubs at the rehabilitation facility, she received an unexpected visitor. Richard Crane arrived unannounced, his usual entourage notably absent. "Dr. Harper," he greeted her with uncharacteristic formality. "I wondered if we might speak privately." Emma led him to her small office, curious about this sudden appearance. "The cubs are doing well. If that's what you're here to ask, they have a good chance of survival now." Richard nodded, but seemed distracted. "That's good to hear, but it's not why I came." He hesitated, then continued. "After the incident, I had my team pull all the records related to the property, including my father's personal files." Emma waited, sensing something significant was coming. "Did you know my father kept journals?" Richard asked, pulling a worn leather notebook from his jacket pocket. He wrote about his time in prison, his community service with wildlife conservation, his attempts to make amends for his past. He placed the journal on Emma's desk. "And he wrote about you." Emma's breath caught as she opened the journal to the bookmarked page. There, in faded ink, was a detailed account of the night 20 years ago when a poacher named Luke Crane had witnessed something impossible: a baby girl and a grizzly bear forming a bond that defied the natural order. "My father claimed that night changed him completely," Richard continued quietly. "He spent the rest of his life trying to protect the forests and the creatures in them. It's why he was so adamant that I maintain certain conservation easements around our developments." He laughed softly without humor. "I always thought it was eccentricity or guilt. I never really believed his story." Emma closed the journal gently. "And now?" Richard met her gaze directly. "I saw you with that bear, Doctor. Harper. I saw how it looked at you, how it worked with you. That's not normal bear behavior." "No," Emma agreed simply, "it's not." A long silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken questions and implications. Finally, Richard stood. "I'm halting construction at Mountain Vista Estates pending a complete environmental reassessment. And I'm establishing a wildlife corridor through the property that will remain undeveloped in perpetuity." His expression was unreadable. "My father would have wanted that." After he left, Emma sat with Luke Crane's journal, reading his careful documentation of an event that had shaped both their lives. In the final entry, dated just months before his death, he had written, "I have never forgotten that night in the forest, when a child's innocence tamed both a bear and a man. I've spent my life trying to be worthy of being spared, both by the bear who could have killed me and by the mercy of those who could have imprisoned me for life. I hope my son will someday understand that our greatest legacy isn't in what we build, but in what we choose to leave untouched." 2 weeks later, Emma stood at the release site deep in the protected forest, watching as the wildlife team prepared to open the transport cages containing the 3 orphaned cubs. They had thrived under specialized care, their chances of survival now considered excellent. What made this release unusual and completely against standard protocol was the presence of the old guardian. Through careful tracking and Emma's intuition, they had selected a release site within his established territory. The aged grizzly watched from a respectful distance as Emma supervised the final preparations. "This goes against every guideline we have," Marcus reminded her nervously. Male bears are known to kill cubs. Not this one, Emma replied with quiet certainty. He's their guardian now. When the cages were opened, the cubs emerged cautiously, sniffing the air of freedom. The wildlife team retreated immediately, leaving only Emma at the site. The cubs explored their surroundings with growing confidence, eventually becoming aware of the massive adult bear watching them from the forest edge. Instead of displaying fear, the cubs approached the old guardian with what could only be described as recognition. The great bear lowered his head, gently sniffing each cub in turn before leading them toward a promising patch of berry bushes nearby. Emma watched this impossible family group begin their new life together, tears streaming down her face. Science could not explain what she was witnessing. But then, the most profound connections rarely fit within the neat boundaries of scientific understanding. As she prepared to leave, the old guardian turned back once more, his gaze finding hers across the clearing. In that moment, Emma felt the completion of a circle that had begun 20 years earlier when tiny hands had reached out to free a suffering creature. "Thank you, old friend," she whispered, "for everything you've taught me." The bear huffed softly in response, then turned to follow the cubs into their new home, disappearing into the forest that would remain protected for generations to come, thanks to an extraordinary bond between a human and a bear that had begun with compassion and come full circle through understanding. In her research journal that night, Emma wrote a single line that would never appear in her official reports or published papers, but which contained the deepest truth she had ever known. What we offer with innocent hands can return to us 1,000-fold, in ways that transcend all boundaries and expectations. The most important discoveries are not those we make about the natural world, but those the natural world makes possible within ourselves. 10 years later, the legacy. The amphitheater at the National Wildlife Conservation Center fell silent as Dr. Emma Harper stepped onto the stage. At 35, she carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone whose work had fundamentally changed her field. Her hair, pulled back in a practical bun, caught the spotlight as she approached the podium, the prestigious Callaway Medal for Conservation Excellence gleaming on its stand beside the microphone. In the front row, her parents, Sarah and Nathan, now in their 60s, watched with undisguised pride. Beside them sat Marcus Chen, Emma's former assistant who had become her trusted colleague and the operational director of the Harper Wildlife Trust. On Sarah's other side was an empty seat reserved for a guest who had not yet arrived. "Thank you all for this tremendous honor," Emma began, her voice carrying easily through the hall. "When I began my work with large predators 2 decades ago, the prevailing view was that these animals were driven purely by instinct and territorial imperatives. The idea that they might possess emotional complexity, multi-generational memory, or the capacity for cross-species empathy was considered fringe science at best." A gentle murmur of amusement rippled through the audience of conservationists, biologists, and policymakers. Today, thanks to the collaborative efforts of researchers across disciplines, we understand that the emotional lives of animals, even those we once considered purely instinctual, are rich, varied, and in many ways parallel our own experiences of connection and community. As Emma continued her acceptance speech, the side door to the amphitheater opened quietly. A tall man in his 50s slipped in, taking the reserved seat next to Sarah, who acknowledged him with a warm smile. Richard Crane had aged well, the silver at his temples adding distinction to his appearance. In the decade since the bear cub rescue, he had transformed from an ambitious developer to one of the nation's most influential advocates for balanced conservation policy. The Crane-Harper Wildlife Corridors now protected over 3 million acres of critical habitat across 5 states, creating safe passages for migrating animals through increasingly fragmented landscapes. The true breakthrough in our understanding came not from technology or methodology, Emma continued, unaware of Richard's arrival, but from patience and presence, from being willing to observe without preconception, to witness without imposing our human narratives on animal behavior. On the screen behind her, photographs appeared, a series of remarkable images taken over the past decade. They showed the 3 bear cubs, now massive adults themselves, thriving in the protected wilderness. And with them, increasingly frail but still unmistakable, the old guardian, who had defied all biological expectations by essentially adopting the orphaned cubs and teaching them the skills needed to survive. The familial unit we've been privileged to observe has rewritten our understanding of bear social structures, Emma explained. For 10 years, we've documented how a male grizzly, which conventional wisdom suggested should have been a threat to these orphaned cubs, instead became their protector and teacher. The images changed to show trail camera footage of the old guardian teaching the younger bears to fish, to find specific medicinal plants, to navigate the complex terrain of their habitat. The final image showed all 4 bears bedded down together in a meadow, the aged grizzly's silver face contrasting with the rich brown coats of his adopted family. Sadly, I must report that last winter, at an estimated age of 35 years, a remarkable longevity for a wild grizzly, the bear we called the Old Guardian entered his den and did not emerge in spring. A hush fell over the audience. Though few knew the full story of Emma's personal connection to this bear, the research findings published about this unusual bear family had captivated the scientific community and the public imagination alike. His legacy, however, continues. The 3 bears he raised have established territories within the protected corridor, and this spring, we documented something extraordinary. The screen showed new footage. One of the female bears, now fully grown, had produced cubs of her own. Most remarkably, trail cameras had captured her bringing her cubs to the site of the old guardian's den, as if introducing them to the memory of her adoptive parent. What we're witnessing may be the establishment of a new matrilineal tradition, one that includes honoring the memory of a guardian who was not biologically related, but who nevertheless shaped the cultural knowledge of this bear family. Emma paused, looking out over the audience. This is why the work we do matters so profoundly. Each life we save, each habitat we protect, carries forward not just genetic material but cultural wisdom, the accumulated knowledge that allows these magnificent creatures to survive and teach the next generation. As she concluded her speech to enthusiastic applause, Emma finally noticed Richard in the front row. Their eyes met in a moment of shared understanding. Both had been transformed by their encounters with the old guardian, Emma as a child reaching out to a suffering creature, Richard through the journal of a father whose life had been changed by witnessing that connection. At the reception, following the ceremony, Richard approached Emma, 2 flutes of champagne in hand. "Congratulations, Dr. Harper," he said, offering her a glass, "though I suspect this award is long overdue." Emma accepted the champagne with a smile. "Thank you for coming, Richard, and for everything your foundation has contributed to the Corridor Project." They moved to a quieter corner of the reception hall, away from the clusters of conservationists eager to speak with the medal recipient. "I have something for you," Richard said, reaching into his jacket pocket. He withdrew a small wooden box, polished to a soft glow. "My father's journals were digitized for the Crane Conservation Archive, but I thought you should have this." Emma opened the box carefully. Inside lay a single curved claw, amber in color and nearly 4 inches long, unmistakably from a grizzly bear. It was among my father's effects, Richard explained. His note said it was found at the site where you first met the old guardian. The rangers recovered it when they investigated the poaching incident. Emma touched the claw gently, a tangible connection to the bear who had shaped her life's work. "Thank you," she said simply, words inadequate for the emotion she felt. "There's something else," Richard continued, his expression growing more serious. "The Senate is voting next month on the Predator Protection Act. It's facing significant opposition from development and agricultural interests." Emma nodded. The legislation would extend federal protections to apex predators and their critical habitats, including the corridors she and Richard had worked to establish. "I've been speaking with senators on both sides," Richard said, "but we need more compelling evidence of why these protections matter. Your research on multi-generational bear behaviors and memory could be the tipping point." "I'll have my team prepare a comprehensive briefing," Emma promised. "The decade-long data on the Guardian's family is particularly compelling." Their conversation was interrupted by the approach of a young woman in her early 20s, her expression eager but hesitant. "Dr. Harper? I'm sorry to interrupt, but I just wanted to say that your work is the reason I chose wildlife biology as my field." She glanced nervously at Richard before continuing. "I'm Lily Mercer, one of the new research assistants at your foundation. I start next month." Emma smiled warmly. "It's lovely to meet you, Lily, and please, call me Emma." As they chatted about Lily's research interests, Emma noticed something about the young woman that sparked a memory, a quality of open-hearted curiosity that reminded her of herself as a child, before scientific training had taught her to maintain professional distance from her subjects. Later that evening, as Emma reviewed the files Lily had sent about her previous fieldwork, she discovered something remarkable. The young researcher had documented multiple instances of cross-species cooperative behaviors in the wild: a fox guiding a lost human hiker to a trail, a dolphin protecting a drowning child, an elephant assisting an injured antelope. Most scientists would dismiss these as anthropomorphism or coincidence. But Emma, who had experienced the most extraordinary cross-species connection imaginable, recognized the significance of these observations. The next morning, Emma called Lily to her office at the Foundation headquarters. "Your documentation of interspecies interactions is fascinating," Emma began, watching the young woman's expression carefully. "Most researchers wouldn't even record these incidents, considering them statistical anomalies or misinterpretations." Lily straightened in her chair. "I know they sound improbable, Dr. Harper, but I documented each case with multiple witnesses and, when possible, photographic evidence." "I believe you," Emma assured her. "In fact, I'd like to establish a new research initiative focused specifically on these phenomena, with you leading the field observations." Lily's eyes widened with surprise and excitement. "Really? I mean, thank you. But why? Most of the scientific community considers these kinds of behaviors to be flukes or projection of human characteristics onto animals." Emma smiled, making a decision she had contemplated for years. "Let me tell you a story, Lily. It began 25 years ago, when I was just a baby, and it involves a sick grizzly bear tied with ropes in the forest." Over the next 2 hours, Emma shared the full account of her lifelong connection with the old guardian, from her first encounter as a baby to their reunion as adults, the dramatic rescue of the orphaned cubs, and the decade of observations that followed. She showed Lily the claw Richard had given her, and the private journals she had kept separate from her official research notes. "I've never shared the complete story publicly," Emma concluded. "The parts that could be substantiated with evidence became the foundation of my research on bear cognition and social behavior. But the personal elements, the recognition, the connection spanning decades, would have undermined my scientific credibility. Lily sat in stunned silence, processing what she had heard. "Why are you telling me this now?" she finally asked. "Because your work shows you're willing to see what others miss," Emma explained. "And because I believe these connections between species aren't anomalies. They're glimpses of a deeper reality that our scientific frameworks aren't yet equipped to fully measure or explain." She handed Lily a folder containing research parameters for the new initiative. "We'll approach this methodically, with rigorous documentation and multiple verification protocols. But we won't dismiss observations simply because they challenge conventional understanding." That conversation marked the beginning of the Interspecies Communication and Cooperation Initiative, a research program that would eventually revolutionize how humans understood their relationships with other species. But its most immediate impact was on the pending legislation. 3 weeks later, Emma and Lily stood before the Senate Committee on Environmental Protection, presenting their findings on how apex predators maintained cultural knowledge across generations and how these traditions were vital to ecosystem health. Richard Crane, using his considerable political influence, had arranged for them to testify. His foundation had also funded a compelling documentary on the old guardian and his adopted family, which had been strategically screened for key senators the week before the vote. As they presented their evidence, Emma noticed one senator in particular watching with unusual attention. Senator Diana Morales, representing a state with significant ranching interests, had been expected to vote against the Predator Protection Act. Yet her questions demonstrated genuine curiosity rather than the skepticism Emma had anticipated. After the hearing, Senator Morales approached Emma privately. "Dr. Harper, your presentation was quite compelling," she began. "I must admit, I came prepared to dismiss much of it as environmental sentimentality, but the data on how these predator families pass knowledge through generations, it reminds me of our own family traditions." Emma recognized an opening. "Senator, if I might ask, what traditions are important in your family?" The senator's professional facade softened slightly. "My grandfather was a rancher. He taught my father, who taught me, how to read the land, when to move the cattle to fresh pasture, how to find water in drought years, which plants signaled good soil health." Her expression grew contemplative. "Without that knowledge passed down, we wouldn't have survived on that land." "That's exactly what we're seeing with these bear families," Emma explained. "They're not just surviving by instinct. They're passing down specific knowledge about when and where to find food, which plants have medicinal properties, how to avoid conflicts with humans." Senator Morales nodded slowly. "I've always viewed predators as threats to livestock, to livelihoods. But you're suggesting they have their own livelihoods, their own traditions to protect." "Precisely. And with proper corridors and protections, the data shows conflicts with ranchers actually decrease. These animals aren't naturally drawn to livestock. They're pushed there when their traditional feeding grounds are compromised." The conversation continued for nearly an hour, ranging from scientific data to personal stories. By the end, Emma sensed a shift in the senator's perspective. Not a complete reversal, but an opening to a new way of seeing the issue. 2 days later, the Predator Protection Act passed by a single vote. Senator Morales, breaking with her party's position, had cast the deciding ballot in favor of the legislation. When the news reached the Harper Wildlife Trust headquarters, the staff erupted in celebration. Decades of work had culminated in the most comprehensive predator protection law in the nation's history. The corridors Emma and Richard had established would now be federally protected, ensuring safe passage for generations of wildlife to come. That evening, as the staff celebration continued, Emma slipped away to her office. She sat at her desk, opening the wooden box containing the old guardian's claw. Beside it, she placed a small frame containing a faded photograph, one of the few tangible reminders of that first miraculous encounter. The image, taken by her mother weeks after the incident, showed baby Emma sleeping peacefully in her crib, clutching her stuffed bear. And through the window behind her, barely visible in the twilight, the silhouette of a large animal watching over her. Emma's phone buzzed with a message from Lily. "You need to see this. Heading to your office now." Moments later, Lily burst in, tablet in hand. "We just got this footage from the northern camera trap," she explained breathlessly. "It's the female grizzly, the one raised by the old guardian. She's been spotted with her cubs near the memorial marker we placed at his den site." Emma looked at the video footage, then froze. Behind the mother bear and her cubs stood a figure that shouldn't have been there. A hiker who had somehow wandered far off the designated trails into protected bear territory. The young man appeared disoriented, possibly lost, and was dangerously close to the bear family. In such situations, a mother grizzly would typically display aggressive defensive behavior, especially with cubs present. But this bear did something extraordinary. She positioned her cubs behind her, then slowly approached the hiker, her posture non-threatening. At a distance of about 50 feet, she sat back on her haunches, the same unusual posture the old guardian had displayed when first recognizing Emma years before. The confused hiker remained still, either from fear or amazement. After a long moment, the bear turned and led her cubs in a wide arc around the human, giving him clear passage back toward the marked trail. "It's exactly like," Lily began. "Like what the old guardian did," Emma finished softly. "She learned from him." "But this is more than learned behavior," Lily insisted. "This bear was essentially showing the lost hiker the way out of her territory. That's communication, intentional guidance." Emma studied the footage again. "We need to identify this hiker, get his account of the experience." Within days, their social media call for information had located the young man, Jason Wheeler, a geology student who had indeed become lost while collecting rock samples. His account matched what the camera had captured, with one additional detail that hadn't been visible in the footage. "After the bear showed me which way to go, she stopped and looked back at me," Jason explained during his interview at the Foundation. "It was the strangest thing. She pushed something toward me with her paw before she left. I thought I was imagining things until I checked my backpack later and found this caught in the strap." He produced a small object, a stone pendant on a leather cord. The pendant was rough-hewn but unmistakable in its shape, a bear claw. "I figured a previous hiker must have lost it and it somehow got caught on my pack," Jason continued. "But I don't remember bumping into anything that could have snagged it." Emma examined the pendant carefully. It was not a real claw, but a stone carving, the kind sold at visitor centers throughout the region. Still, the coincidence was striking. Further investigation revealed that the pendant had belonged to a young girl who had visited the park with her school group the previous spring. During their nature hike, she had placed the pendant as an offering at the discrete marker commemorating the old guardian's den site, a practice that had spontaneously evolved among visitors who had heard fragments of the remarkable bear's story. "So, the mother bear picked up this pendant from her den site and gave it to a lost human?" Lily asked, struggling to make sense of the behavior. "That's not just unusual, it's unprecedented." Emma sat back, her mind working through the implications. "Not entirely unprecedented," she said quietly. "The old guardian recognized me across a 20-year span. He protected my daughter's self from poachers. He adopted orphaned cubs that weren't his own. He seemed to understand human intentions in ways that defied conventional explanations. And now, his adopted daughter seems to have inherited not just his territory and his skills, but his unusual relationship with humans, Lily concluded. It's almost as if he taught her that some humans can be trusted, Emma finished. That some connections transcend the boundaries we assume exist between species. This incident became the first formally documented case in the Foundation's interspecies communication study. Over the next 5 years, Emma and Lily's team recorded dozens more examples of animals displaying behaviors that suggested recognition, memory, and intentional communication across species boundaries. The scientific establishment remained skeptical, but the accumulating evidence became increasingly difficult to dismiss, especially when similar patterns began emerging in research conducted at sites around the world. On the 10th anniversary of the old guardian's passing, Emma visited the den site where he had spent his final winter. The Foundation had kept the location minimally marked and restricted to research personnel only, respecting both the bear's legacy and the need to limit human impact on the area. Emma sat quietly by the den entrance, now partially collapsed and covered with vegetation. She had come alone, having reached a milestone that called for personal reflection. The Foundation's research on interspecies communication had finally been accepted for publication in the prestigious journal Science, marking a watershed moment in how the scientific community regarded such phenomena. "We did it, old friend," she said softly to the empty den. "What began with a baby and a bear in the forest has changed how we understand the connections between all living things." As she sat in contemplation, Emma became aware of a presence nearby. Looking up, she saw the female grizzly, the old guardian's adopted daughter, watching her from the edge of the clearing. With her were 2 nearly grown cubs, powerful young bears now entering their 3rd year. Emma remained perfectly still, her heart racing not with fear, but with wonder. The mother bear huffed softly, then deliberately led her cubs in a wide circle around Emma before disappearing into the forest. The message seemed clear: acknowledgement without encroachment, recognition without confrontation. That evening, as Emma recorded the encounter in her research journal, she added a personal reflection. 25 years ago, a baby reached out to free a suffering bear. 10 years ago, that same bear, aged and wise, saved orphaned cubs against all biological expectations. Today, his legacy continues in the bears who carry his teachings and in the humans whose understanding has been forever changed by his example. Science seeks to measure and quantify, to establish patterns and predict outcomes. But some connections defy our measurements, existing in the spaces between what we can prove and what we know to be true. The old guardian taught me that the most profound truths often begin with the simplest acts of compassion. A tiny hand reaching out to ease suffering. A powerful creature choosing protection over aggression. As our research continues to document these extraordinary connections between species, I remain grateful for that first miraculous encounter that showed me what was possible when we open ourselves to relationships that transcend the boundaries we believe separate us from the natural world. In the end, perhaps this is the most important discovery of all, that the capacity for connection, for recognition, for compassion exists not because of our differences, but because of something more fundamental that unites all living beings, a shared experience of this world that, when acknowledged, can bridge even the widest divides between species. As night fell over the vast protected wilderness, a mother bear and her cubs bedded down in a hollow not far from where the old guardian had once made his den. And miles away, in her cabin at the edge of the forest, Emma Harper closed her journal, feeling the weight of the bear claw pendant she now wore around her neck, a tangible reminder of connections that defied explanation but transformed lives. In the morning, she would return to the foundation, to the data and the documentation, to the work of translating extraordinary experiences into the language of science. But for tonight, she simply honored the memory of a grizzly bear who had recognized a baby's innocence and responded not with the aggression his species was known for, but with a protection and connection that had ultimately changed how humans understood their place in the natural world. And somewhere in the vast wilderness, the descendants of that remarkable bear continued his legacy, carrying forward not just his genes, but his wisdom, creating new connections that would, in time, help heal the ancient divide between humans and the wild creatures with whom they shared the earth.